Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 54 of the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. This is Jacob. And this week we have an interview with a gray area Kratom user, Sofia. It's a really great conversation, and we're looking forward to sharing that with you. For this week's intro topic, we're going to talk a little bit about supplements. I'm going to give you my point of view as a supplement skeptic, and my girl Decima is going to give you a bit of her point of view on using supplements to help with mitigating and addressing the symptoms of withdrawal. I looked up all the supplements. I did some research over my many Kratom quits, of which I think I had a total of 11, but it was definitely more than 10. And I tried a lot of them. I tried vitamin C, the protocol where you're taking like 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams every couple of hours for a number of days and you preload with it. I tried DLPA. I tried magnesium. I tried NAC. I tried, I think, just vitamin D. I thought maybe some sunshine would help. There's probably other stuff I tried too that I can't remember. But long story short, I didn't feel like any of those things did anything for my withdrawals. I was still kicking, still had the restless legs all night. I still had the flu-like symptoms. I still couldn't sleep. I still had the stomach problems. I really just didn't feel like they did anything for me at all. And I know that's not a common experience. It seems like supplements do help everybody. The only thing I actually did find helpful was really sleepy time tea and a hot bath at night. And that only worked for maybe 5-10 minutes when I was in the worst of the withdrawals. I also at one point went to the doctor before I decided to try medicated assisted treatment, and I even got prescribed gabapentin, but it's a prescription that you can get, and I know that works really well for a lot of people for withdrawals. I took it for 2 days and I really didn't feel like it did anything as well, so I just tossed it. So for me, I never found success with the use of supplements. Maybe I was doing it wrong, or maybe they were working, but just not enough for me to notice a difference. But in any event, that was my experience with supplements. I'm a skeptic, but you got to try it for yourself. And I'm going to let Decima speak to her experience with the successful use of supplements.
Hey, you guys, we are talking about supplements, and Jacob is a skeptic. I, however, am a bit of a fan of some supplements, to be honest. I don't think there are many supplements out there that I haven't tried. And at the end of the segment, I'm even going to tell you my top 3. But first, let's talk about my top 3 reasons why I suspect many supplements might not work for some people. I feel I should preface this by saying that I understand that everybody does not need everything. Nevertheless, the science does back the fact that most of us are more than likely deficient of a few chemicals, vitamins, minerals, etc. after using Kratom long term. And the very best way to address these issues is by working together with your doctor to determine through testing and blood work, etc., what exactly you may be deficient in. That being said, I feel like the number one reason that a particular supplement might not work for somebody is most likely because they don't even need that supplement. Maybe you heard that a particular supplement works well for many people while detoxing, and so you go out and get this supplement in hopes that it will work for you too. But in reality, you aren't even deficient in, for example, magnesium. I get the urgency, the desperation. We all feel it when we're searching for relief while in the throes of withdrawal. I'm totally guilty of buying all the supplements and just taking them with no rhyme or reason in hopes that I'll just feel better. But in the end, we end up just literally pissing away money and supplements that aren't even helping us. So make sure that you need what you are taking and you are taking what you need. Number 2 reason I feel supplements may not work for a lot of people is because they don't take them long enough. As addicts and normal human beings programmed to seek pleasure over pain, it's natural and our habit to want instant gratification, relief, and results. In reality, most of these supplements are not going to replenish our depletions and deficits overnight. My personal advice is to begin supplements early, say at least 6 to 8 weeks before jumping, and take them long enough for them to have time to do their job. The last thing that I think that people need to consider when it comes to supplements is quality. Everybody knows you're not going to get good quality supplements at Walmart. Well, I hope you guys know that. Once you know which supplements you need and want to take, it's worth the investment to source them from a reputable vendor, supplier, etc., and choose only high quality products. Your health is worth the investment. Personal side note and tip, I prefer powders or liquids over all those pills for better absorption. Now, as promised, my top 3 favorite supplements to use when quitting Kratom are: number 1, 100% without a doubt, no question, DLPA. This amino acid is going to help your brain produce the dopamine that is no longer getting from Kratom. This is huge. And if I could only choose one supplement out of all of them, it would be this one, DLPA. Number 2 is NAC. This is another amino acid that helps with energy, mental clarity, and cravings. Last but not least is a good magnesium powder. I'm not going to say any brand names, but it begins with a C and rhymes with palm. This is a powder form of magnesium that you can mix up in your water and drink it. It's going to help immensely with the restless leg syndrome and insomnia that plagues so many of us, especially in the early days of acute withdrawal. So there you have it, my take on supplements. Take them, leave them. What it all comes down to is that you do your research and you don't take Kratom. We've got this, you guys.
Welcome. Today we have Sofia on the podcast. Please tell us about yourself.
Let's see. So I'm a 46-year-old. I'm a social worker. I'm Latina. I'm a mom of a 4-year-old boy and a wife. I think something that's important about my identity I was thinking about is I came up pretty hard. I grew up in a lot of poverty with a lot of trauma, surrounded by substance use, and it's just been a major part of my life. Most of my life was just dedicated to working through that and making sense of that. And it's a big part of my identity and who I am.
So when was the last time you took Kratom?
Just got 4 months a few days ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And so let's rewind a little bit. And could you tell us about how you were introduced to Kratom and when that was?
Yeah, I had barely heard about it. I remember somebody mentioning it. I heard about it, was a little bit curious. And I actually saw it in like a booth, which I know a lot of listening to the podcast, like a lot of people found it head shops and gas stations, but it was this very trendy looking boutique with crystals and herbs and natural things, looked very she and nice. And I was like, oh, I heard about this Kratom thing. I'm going to give this a try. Let me check this out.
And when was that?
About 4 years ago.
And what type of product did you start off with and how much were you using?
I was just generally powder. I tried everything else that was out there, but I was standardly powder. And with powder, it's hard to know how much you're using, but from everything that I could gather, especially because I did end up tapering and measuring and stuff, I think it was about 15 to 20 grams per day.
And was there a particular strain?
I like the green Mengdai the most, and I went back and forth with green and white. Yeah, like a little bit more stimulants kind of feeling. But I like the green the most because it had that kind of balance of euphoria and stimulants feeling. I tried to mix them up because they said to do that for your tolerance.
Yeah. And how many times a day were you taking it?
2 to 3. I tried to keep it at 2, but would often fall into 3. And of course, there was those days that I went more. But generally, I really tried to hold close to 2.
And was it just toss and wash or?
Yeah, toss and wash.
I was never a powder user. So whenever I encounter a powder user in the wild, I have all sorts of questions.
Yeah, I was one of those. I could take a tablespoon, just no problem.
Okay. Do you have a history of issues with other addictions and other substances?
Yeah, I have a complicated, nuanced relationship with substances. I grew up around everybody I knew was doing substances. And I think because of that early trauma, I was really young. When I was really young, like 11 or so, I got severely depressed and very actively suicidal. And I had a really young mom, single mom, no resources, didn't know what to do, was in poverty. She used, and she started getting me high, and it seemed to work. But actually, I was really actively trying to kill myself. I wasn't going to school. I was a mess, and it actually helped. And that's where things started. And I always had just an interesting relationship with substances. I did about everything out there. But since I'd been around it so much, I always seemed to have some sort of respect for substances. I almost used them like medicine, which obviously had bad side effects and could be destructive, but I saw them more as medicine. And I never got physically addicted to anything until I took Kratom.
It's interesting.
I took pills, opiate pills even, and nothing ever gave me that physical addiction but Kratom.
Are you much of a drinker?
Definitely have had really complicated, long history with alcohol. And once again, one of those kind of maybe functional alcoholic, or never got to that place of that it seemed completely destructive, but I was unhappy with my relationship with alcohol. It doesn't feel good. And I think that was part of using Kratom for sure, was like, it's a substitute to alcohol, like many people, they think. I think just the part that's important to me about my trauma with substances, I guess this is something that I have a hard time in the recovery community about, is I think there's something about the trauma and my mom coming in and giving me substances that I have and I know this is complicated, but I have a kind of warm relationship with substances in a realistic way too. I know they're dangerous, but I have a hard time demonizing substances. And I've even been called out in a meeting once for not being like, no, this is the green demon, the devil, it's like this really. And I think I guess I have this feeling sometimes that things were so dark and so hard that there is something about substances that they've given me this other way of looking at things. And I've been able to break through some barriers in my head that I think when you have the kind of trauma that I have, can be really tough to manage through, to walk through.
Yeah, I politically and just in terms of sociology, I'm not a big fan of demonizing drugs either. I really think the way government reacts to substance abuse by criminalizing it and putting people in prisons is just horrible. And I see substance abuse as a coping mechanism for people with trauma, people that are victims of capitalism, all sorts of things. But on the podcast, I do feel like, at least with Kratom, there's a valorization of that substance. So sometimes when I badmouth Kratom, it's like kind of a counteract the valorization of it. And also, I've just talked to enough of us Kratom addicts. I know some of us really internalize some of especially because for many of us, Kratom at first worked, and it did get us through difficult times. So it's that dialogue, and then you have to take responsibility. It's not really, as somebody that's in the helping profession, it's up to us to take a substance or not take it. And it ends up not really being about that substance anyway.
And I'm a harm reduction therapist. So I also don't believe in, I believe in abstinence, and it has its, and I'm doing it right now with Kratom. And I think when you say you're harm reduction, it doesn't mean you don't believe in abstinence. But if people aren't ready for that, I do believe in harm reduction.
Yep. Dead people don't recover. And and the idea that the only measure of success in recovery is abstinence, and continuous abstinence is maybe one of the original sins of the 12-step model. Okay, I'll get back track on the questions here. What were some of the early signs that Kratom was creating a problem in your life?
I knew pretty quickly early on that it felt good. I went back and forth initially being like, oh, it's so subtle. It should be okay. That's a pretty subtle, good feeling till, wait, this is great. And I know from my history, if something's pretty great, it's almost like too good to be true. I'm like, if this is taking care of so many issues that I'm having, this can't be good. And then really quickly, I couldn't stick with the suggested use. I don't really remember what they told me something. I think they told me like, don't do it more than a couple times a week or something at the boutique. And I quickly just use a teaspoon or something like that. I quickly got more than the suggested use. And then for some reason in my head, I got this idea that if I took half of a tablespoon, if I took no more, like that could be my max, half of a tablespoon twice a day. And I always struggled with that. Was the thing. I was always trying to be there and I was always messing up. Just that I just couldn't stick with the suggested use. And then I couldn't even stick with my own idea of what would be this is not a harmful amount of use. And then I have chronic pain. That's the other thing, that I have chronic pain pre-Kratom, and it started to get really bad with Kratom. That's the other thing. I was like, wait, my pain is increasing. I have anxiety too. My anxiety was increasing, and I've some cognitive stuff, like real trouble with memory and like executive functioning. And that all started to get worse. But at the same time, I had turned 40. I'd had a baby. COVID had started. I got COVID. There were so many things that had happened around the same time that I started Kratom that I was, what's what? Did old age get me? Did Kratom get me? Was it perimenopause? Is it having a baby? Is it? So I was wondering, is what's happening? Something's going wrong with me. And I wondered if it was Kratom.
Did you ever go through withdrawals because you went traveling or because you tried to quit and take a break or anything like that?
No, I wouldn't quit or take a break. I traveled. And now that I think about it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I would put Kratom into different vitamin packages. And I went to Cuba and all sorts of different places that probably could have been pretty sketchy. Thank goodness nothing happened. I didn't as I got later into my use, I did try to quit once and had a big life change came about. And so I decided not to quit during that time. And then I think as I got into my use, I guess what I wanted to go to was it almost was like I was in constant withdrawal because I wouldn't take enough to keep it up. I was trying to stave off the withdrawals, but I had a mild withdrawal all the time. So that's, I think, what pushed me to go, what am I doing? I'm not even getting high. I'm just almost in a constant state of withdrawal because I'm not taking enough. Every once in a while I take enough and be like, oh, I feel so much better. But then also your downs are so much harder when you start taking these really higher amounts. And that's when I was like, this is not good. This is no way to live. I feel like crap all the time. And I would wake up in withdrawals. I started waking up withdrawing, and this is ridiculous. I can't get through sleep.
Yeah, that's a whole thing. Yeah. And was this the last fall?
I'm so bad with time, but I would say when I started having that feeling of withdrawal, sadly, it was almost like a year before I quit. I think it might have been 2 years even before I quit. Yeah, it was really hard to quit. Like I said, I'd never had this experience with anything. I just could not quit.
So you finally did 4 months ago. What happened? What was the turning point?
I think one thing that's always saved me from one thing that's really helpful that I have, for better or for worse, is I'm such a talker. I'm an oversharer. I talk to everybody about everything. So I didn't know anybody on Kratom or who did Kratom. Definitely a lot of friends with substance issues, but I just talked to everybody about it. And actually a friend of mine sent me your podcast and I listened to it. And then your podcast brought me into that rabbit hole of there was the Reddit groups and the Facebook groups and then I remember emailing you guys for meetings. And so I was like, oh, wow, it really changed the way I was thinking about it. I think there was something in my head that was like, this is a failure of character. I'm weak in some kind of way. There's something wrong with me here, and I just need to get it together and have more self-discipline. And when I found this other world, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's a ton of people going through what I'm going through. This is an actual thing. It changed. And then I kept talking to people about it. And then I was saying, like, I really can't quit this. I think I may have to go to detox. But detox for me seemed like I've got a little kid. I've got my job and my jobs, a couple of them, and just felt like I wasn't going to be able to manage detox, didn't know how to tell my work about it. And then a friend of mine said, she gave me the idea of like, why don't you just get an Airbnb and just detox on your own? I don't think I was at a high enough kind of level that I really needed the physical detox that I couldn't manage myself, I thought. And that was what I needed. I needed kind of the community that kind of gave you all the steps of how to detox, and hearing everybody's experience and learning about the vitamins and whatnot. And then my friend's idea, I talked to my husband. He was super supportive, said, I'm just going to need to take off for a while. And I couldn't really handle my family. And I just needed to have that time without work to do it. And so I did.
This is starting to ring my memory. We were chatting in that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
How long was your Airbnb?
It was so I went in Wednesday night and left Sunday. Yeah. Went in like that afternoon Wednesday and left on Sunday.
And did you cold turkey?
I tried to taper for 3 weeks before that. And I actually, even though I was on a pretty low dose, I actually had all the symptoms, or not all of them, but most of the symptoms that I went back and I looked at my journal because I journaled through it before I was going to be on this podcast. And I was like, oh, wow, no, I had a lot of the symptoms that people on higher doses had. But where was I? Yeah. So I tried to taper for 3 weeks before, and 2 of those weeks were just messy. I would start to taper, then I'd fall off. And then it was like, oh gosh, this is a week before my cold turkey day. And since I had the Airbnb and I'd set up everything with my husband and work and my life and my family, I was like, it was a hard cut day and I really wanted to do it. So I was like, oh, it's a week. So that week I got serious and I did start cutting cold turkey a lot more serious. And I think that week I got down to about 6 grams a day. And so I had symptoms throughout the tapering was rough. It was tough. Like I had symptoms all throughout that. And then I did have withdrawal symptoms those first, gosh, it felt like a week, but certainly the first 4 days for sure.
Yeah. It sounds like you had a rapid taper and then you just went cold turkey off about 6 grams. And
right.
So you're one of the first people I've ever talked to, and this is a good social skill. This is a good resilience. It sounds like you talked to the real people in your real life about this before you went online.
A lot. Yeah. I talked to everybody and for years because that's just how I am. I just talk to whenever I'm anxious. I'm an anxious person and I just talk to everybody about everything that I'm worried about. And I'm very lucky to have a great community. I've got a lot of really loving, warm, wonderful people in my life.
Yeah. A lot of the people struggling with Kratom, they hide it from themselves and then they hide it from the people around them. And it's a big breakthrough when they're able to tell somebody in their real life about it. So it's a great coping skill. It'll help you with any problem that you have anytime in your life. If you can talk to the people around you and rely on them and not isolate and hide from them. So
I really think it's been a superpower. I'd say everybody around me is probably super annoyed. But I think they were just done and over hearing about Kratom. So I was like, oh, what am I going to do? Oh, Kratom. Oh my gosh. What am I going to? I think a lot of people are like, you're fine. You see, you're okay. But I think my friends especially once I got the podcast and started, I'm like, no, this is actually a real thing. People really do suffer from this. I started to explain it to people like, no, it is an opiate. No, I actually don't think I'm fine. I actually think this might be dangerous. Then I think people took it more seriously.
In general, how did the first 30 days go?
It was tough. I think especially the first 2 weeks. I have it here because I did write down so the first 5 days I had trouble sleeping, nausea. I couldn't eat. I think a lot of people have that, just no appetite. I had cramps. I got all the cold symptoms, got full on cold, headache, shortness of breath, shivering. I posted on Facebook about, I think it was 3 days in, I was just so anxious. And one of the things that was really helping me, I was out in this Airbnb close to the woods, and I would go out on these walks in the woods in the morning. And it was really hard to get myself up and out, but it would make all the difference in the world to be outside. It was the day before I was going to leave the Airbnb, and I just couldn't. I was like shivering with fear. I was like, I just have a bad feeling. And I'm like, okay, this is just your withdrawal. I just pushed myself to go out. And I went on this hike in the woods, and I got to this place in the path where I couldn't go through. The path had gone underwater in the rain, and I was like stuck. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have to go back on the path. And there's these thicket bushes all around me. And I look at the front of the path, and there's a bear in the way, and I couldn't go anywhere but forward because there's these big, thicket, thorny bushes all around. And I was like on my I'm withdrawing, and I'm just sweating and shivering and shaking. And what do I do?
You
I
run
think
into a bear in the woods.
I ran into a bear in the woods, and I was just like, oh my God. I think I just heard this NPR thing too. This like, I had heard this article about somebody who actually got attacked by a bear, and I'm running it over and over in my mind. And I literally stood there like 45 minutes hoping the bear would leave. And finally I had to march out through the thicket. I like tore up my pants, got all scraped up. My pants were all ripped up, had to go around so I didn't walk past the bear. And at the end of it, I just took it as, I think I might have told you or somebody, like I was on Facebook, and I was like, it's like the bear became my spirit animal, because it was just, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then it's like, you could find a bear, and it was just like that. And I was still okay. It was still okay. What's that? Was that quote? That's everything's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, everything's going to be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's probably not the end. And so now whenever I get that anxious idea, but something bad could happen, it might, but you'll live through it. You'll make it through anyway. And if you don't, then that's the end. So that was what was meant to be. And
There's an analogy there.
lesson learned.
Yeah. And so with your withdrawals, was there things that you did that you found that were very helpful?
Yeah, I did the vitamin C protocol. I did all of it, Charlie. Like I did everything that anybody named. I did the DLPA, the NAC, the L-theanine, the omega-3, the magnesium, GABA, rhodiola. I did the mushrooms, the line main mushrooms, and the cordyceps, and the reishi, or yeah, you name it. I was like Tylenol and Advil, and I had Zofran for the nausea, and I did take trazodone at night to sleep, and yeah, you name it, I did.
Did you think any of those made a difference? It's hard when you're doing all of them at the same time to distinguish them, but
I really think that the vitamin C actually helped, but it did. I get nauseous really easy. And I think
yeah.
it got me nauseous. So I had to stop it, but I felt a difference when I got off it. So I think the vitamin C actually really helps. So if you can stomach it, I really recommend it. The biggest thing that helped was going outside and getting movement. And it's the hardest thing too. People say exercise, and I love exercising, but I couldn't exercise that first week. I could just walk. I think if once you can exercise, or if you can, that is the best thing that you can do. I really think the meetings, the community, being with other people that understand what you're going through, giving yourself that time and space from your responsibilities. That's not everybody can do that. So I get it. But the time that you can take, I think can really help. Yeah. The Epsom salt baths really help with the pain.
Shifting gears a little bit, I know you have a career in the helping professions. How does that impact your recovery?
It's just such a blessing to me I just have a reminder every single day that I have to practice what I preach. And I see what works. I see what works with my clients, and it's just a constant reminder to take care of myself. And I'm a human being that struggles, and the things I've been through, I have empathy for my clients and can connect with them a lot through what I've been through.
And any advice for taking care of yourself while you're do you experience burnout, or like taking on some of your being exposed to other people's problems? And
I did more early on in my field, and I still do sometimes, not as much. I think it's something that you get a little bit used to and you work through. And there was times that I got burnout. I think I've gotten a philosophy almost in life that like we're all just doing the best that we can do. And I think burnout comes from you're looking for a certain outcome and you're set and held on that outcome. And I really believe in doing work that just being present with people and letting them have their whatever their experience is and whatever their path is. And if you can be present and warm and understanding, just being somebody there for them, that's what we can do. And that's really big. So being attached to that outcome of like, I'm going to fix somebody is what causes the burnout. And yeah, I think being able to let go of that and just being like, I'm here on people's journey.
It's like operationalizing the serenity prayer in your
Totally.
in your day-to-day interactions with other humans.
Right.
And you could probably same principles maybe with parenting. So
with everything, it always comes down to the serenity prayer. That's what life is all about. Yeah.
Yeah. What are some of the support systems you have in place to stay on this path?
I needed to get something in my life that I love dancing a lot. I'm a salsa dancer, and I used to dance a long time ago. And I asked my husband I was like, while I'm getting off Kratom and doing this thing, to have a little bit more time. I'm taking a time out of my life to train for just a few months and perform. And so just have something to really wrap my head around and have a hobby and get really interested in, and it's physical. So that's been huge. It's something that kind of takes the place of how much energy you put into using, and the meetings, going to the meetings, your podcast, that recovery community. I meditate, I journal, I do different exercise and yoga. I think paying attention to nutrition and health helps too, to just support yourself through the process. Being outside and being in nature as much as I can, nurturing my community, my friends and family. I still do the vitamins and the herbs. I still do all of that stuff. Therapy.
This is a little off script. Are you a Spanish speaker?
I am, yeah.
In Spanish, is Kratom still Kratom?
It's funny because I don't know anybody who does Kratom in Spanish. Yeah, I don't know. I've looked for it when I've been in Latin America, and I haven't seen it. But no, yeah, I don't think it's not. I don't know anybody who even talks about it.
Maybe a culture clash.
Be like Kratom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Like I said, I don't even know nobody in my world even. Yeah.
4 months out, do you have any cravings or, I could like a little bit of one time? That's my thing. I'll just do it one time. Take the edge off.
No, yeah, like I very unfortunately, I have cravings every single day, all throughout the day. I envy people. I feel like a lot of people I've talked to with the amount of time that I have don't have the cravings that I have anymore, but I still do. It comes up on a regular basis that I think I have a young kid. I'm trying to do all this dancing stuff that takes a lot of energy. I definitely fill my day. So I think I'm often tired and pushing myself, and I'll often think, oh, if I could just make all this bad feeling. And I have chronic pain too.
Yeah.
So, I could make all this go away. And I just have to tend with that. And I've just decided I think that's what the meditation and stuff about is. There's a little bit of this radical acceptance of, okay, here's this feeling of, I really want something to make this end. And this is part of what is happening right now. And I'm trying not to push it away so much. I think like I said, I envy other people, and I want to be like, I shouldn't feel this anymore. It's been enough time. I'm just starting to go, this is what's happening for me. And then I know all the things that I need to do to take care of myself on the days that I exercise and that I get outside and that I do my hobby and that I get enough sleep and blah, blah, blah. I know that stuff really helps, and I know it makes a difference.
Yeah.
And I try to do the whole, like they say, play the tape and write the whole story and just think, okay, so I'll feel better for 30 minutes. And then what? If that, because it started to be like, it just stops working like it used to. I also think it's not just tolerance. Sometimes I think it deadens out your dopamine receptors or something, and you just can't you're chasing that dragon, and you're just not going to get back to what it once was.
Yes, that's almost a near universal, and the permutations of it and the details are a little bit different for everybody, but yes. I hope you're able to keep practicing radical acceptance. At the same time, I hope the cravings pass.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when did they pass for you? Did you notice a time that they go away, or?
I cheated a little bit by starting this podcast. So I burnt it was a month in. So that first month I definitely had them. And part of it was like trying to cope with the withdrawals and things like that. But once I started the podcast, I burnt that bridge. And I know everybody can't do that. Has my life been perfect since then? No. Earlier when you were talking, like it's a year in and I haven't reestablished my exercise routine yet. I start it and I fall back on it. And I had reinitiated that using Kratom. I've talked about this on the podcast a bunch, like started running 5Ks and going to the gym 3 or 4 times. And I just have not been able to capture that. So I guess I have had some thinking, well, maybe I can get back into exercise by using Kratom. I'll have a thought like that. And I've talked about this before. I never used the powder. So sometimes I'm like, maybe if I used it right, if like I had the tea bags, but it's not overwhelming, fortunately. I did have a bad bottom because my use got really chaotic and disruptive. I was spending $100 a day and it was really compulsive and just like doing 2 extract shots at once. Some of the folks like you that were a powder user and you were a borderline gray area user, I think it could have got a lot worse for you if you could have stayed on that for 5 more years and then 5 years later been in a lot worse shape.
Yeah.
So it's probably good you did, but you weren't going bankrupt because of this.
And I think that's one of those things that maybe I don't know if this is a general rule of thumb, but maybe when you have hit bottom and such a hard bottom, you're going to have less cravings because it's so much less appealing.
Yes.
And when you haven't, it's like easier to be like, that wasn't that bad. And what if I did it? You're not thinking about the $100 a day or something like, no, forget that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How is your life today in relationships, work, parenting? How are things going?
It's great. I think things are good. One thing I didn't notice about the Kratom while I was using it that I know now that I don't know if I already said this, but I think I didn't notice my irritability except for with my husband. And I thought it was just him. It was like, he just must be doing so many annoying things. But my irritability, our relationship is much better. And I'm definitely less irritable with him. And I think people have talked about this irritability with Kratom. Since I didn't have it with other people and I just had it with my husband, I just figured he was just messing up so much that it was his fault. But that's a big thing that I noticed. And of course, your marriage is one of the biggest things of your life. You can get that relationship feeling better. That's huge. And yeah, my pain, that's the other thing that's crazy. My pain had gotten so intensely bad on Kratom. And I told you I'm a dancer. I like to move. I lost mobility in my shoulder just from such intense pain, and my pain has decreased incredibly. I have fibromyalgia and I still have bad pain, but so much less pain. And once again, that cognitively, I'm so much sharper now. I have memory issues and stuff like that, but it got so obviously better that people have commented on it and you can notice it. But yeah, I still have those. I always think when you're not taking Kratom, there's just more well-being. Like in general, there's so much more well-being in life. Everything feels much better on a bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, there are more moments of, oh, I have to sit through this. Oh, I can't take anything for this. Oh, there's nothing to reach out to. And I'll try some lion's mane mushrooms and some L-theanine. And that's what I do. And that's what I'll take instead of Kratom, and it's not that quick fix, but that's still something I'm contending with, and that is part of my life today.
All right, let's talk about something fun. We already know we have something in common. We're both fans of the Grateful Dead, and I can't believe it was 30 years ago that we might have been going to see in some of the same shows.
Yeah, so crazy. Yeah, maybe even a little longer, but yeah.
Back then, did you see people on tour that had substance abuse problems?
Definitely. Yeah, I actually think Dead Tour helped me I had ran off on Dead Tour when I was 14 years old. I left home, ran off on Dead Tour and partied like the rest of them. But it was so hard. I had no idea what I was getting into. It was such a hard life. I instantly got lice and spent the $200 that I had there and was hanging out with some real shady people. And quickly on Dead Tour, that's actually, I think my first, maybe not my first, but I think that I got really into sobriety because I think I had hit so hard there. It was such a hard life. Of course, I was like a kid out on my own, but I got really into on Dead Tour. I got into that in the Rainbow Trail, which they have the alcohol camp. I don't know about the rainbow gatherings and
Yes.
things like that. So yeah, they do have the alcohol camp, but you're pretty much sober. Like they don't let most things, I guess, smoke weed or whatever, but there wasn't alcohol or drinking in there. And I started to gravitate towards people that were into Eastern philosophy and yoga and activism and caring about the world. And it actually ended up being it went from a really dark place to a time. And I actually got sober as in my teenage years. I had it pretty together and had a really good experience, like meeting a lot of amazing people that I learned a lot from.
Did you identify as a wharf rat?
I don't know at the time yeah. I don't know at the time, no.
Yeah, that experience really gave me some pretty liberal and progressive views on drugs. I knew people that got busted, and it was definitely a very white thing. So there was a lot of privilege, and so the drug war actually, I don't think holding up the Dead tours as an example of harms of prohibition are good, but.
Back off one thing that you just said. One thing that was really amazing for me going on Dead Tour so young is I left the projects. I saw privilege, and although it made me really jealous and bitter, and that's another part of me that I always have to contend with. I think it was really good for me. It gave me a chance to also get out and see, people of there are these other things. The people that I knew that were doing drugs, like you said, didn't have this they were going to prison. They were teenage moms that didn't have the kind of opportunities that these other people doing drugs were, like expanding their minds and learning about things and having these experiences. And so I think it was such a gift and a blessing for me to actually be able to, even though I didn't go, it was almost like my high school. I almost got to go to a fancy private high school, which was Dead Tour, because there were so many just people of privilege, and they were educated, and they'd come from this really different life that it lifted me out of a world I would have never otherwise been able to get out of.
What kind of music are you listening to these days?
These days, I'm still I am Latina hippie. I still like old music in both English and Spanish. I like baladas and corridos, and obviously I'm a salsa dancer. I like salsa, banda. I like rock en español and that same kind of. And I like all it's great for Neil Young and all the. My husband always makes fun of me. As long as they have mullets, she'll listen to it. Whether it be in Spanish or English, she'll listen to it as long as they got mullets. He's like, nothing after 1980. Yeah.
If their money wasn't an issue and your schedule with your career and the kids, where would you like to visit in the world?
I'd like to go to Cambodia. I think is a place that's next on my bucket list. A couple years ago, I'd wanted to go to Cuba for a long time. I went to Cuba, and then the next thing on my list was Cambodia. And I like to go to obviously the places that are a little bit harder to get to, places that people haven't set foot into as much, but definitely that gets a lot harder when you're a mom and it's harder to get away, and those places take longer. It's harder to fly out. Then you have to take 1,000 buses to get somewhere. But yeah.
All right. A couple last questions. We'll wrap up here. What is your top tip for someone if they're getting ready to quit Kratom?
If you can, take as much time away that you can from your responsibilities like work and family. Make a plan and support yourself with the Quitting Kratom community. I think that, the vitamin C protocol, the DLPA, the NAC, the L-theanine, all of those things, I do think they make a difference. I do think they're helpful. Go outside every day, go on a walk. If you can, exercise, take Epsom salt baths, journal. That journal, it was really just before I did the podcast, going back and looking at your journal, that really helps you to not relapse later on. Because your brain easily goes to, that wasn't so bad. Then you read it and you're like, oh, dang, I don't want to go through that again. I think everything that you can do to support yourself and whatever that means for you, I think that's different for everybody. I needed to be alone. Some people need to be with people. And just know every time that you don't use Kratom is a win. And keep rewarding yourself along the way. Every time, I think you need to reward yourself, even when you relapse, every single time you don't take it, that's a win. And if you don't reward yourself, you lose that motivation it's a marathon, not a race, right? You got to be kind to yourself. And for me, I think of it as living a better, healthier life in the long term, and be careful of getting in that spiral of addiction, that shame spiral of you're just white knuckling it, and then you relapse and you hate yourself and you beat yourself up, and then you get a couple days and you beat yourself up. I really just encourage people to just be really kind to themselves in the process and just be really careful of that shame, because I think the shame's part of the addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And then I always, like I said earlier, I think the programmy stuff, right? Know your why and play the tape.
Excellent. All right. Let's say we had a time capsule, time machine, and if we go a year ahead from now and you could send yourself a message in March 2025, what would you tell yourself?
I tell myself, because I can be a bit of a pessimist and also just really hard on myself and negative and anxious, I would say just take it easy, trust yourself. It's all going to work out in the long run, and you always land on your feet in the end.
Any questions for me?
I guess what brought you here? Like, you help so many people, and I've heard so many people say it, and I know you have too. This podcast it's just phenomenal. And I see you put tons of work and time and effort, and I know you're not making the big bucks for this. What inspired you to get here?
When I quit, I wanted to talk to people about it, and I was going to AA meetings, but the people in AA in my real life didn't know what it was. I found podcasts really helpful for quitting drinking. I wanted to meet people and talk to people, and that had the same Kratom issue. I had relapsed like 4 or 5 times, and I wanted some way to burn my ships. If I'm a host of a Quitting Kratom podcast, that's my new identity. And my kids are teenagers now. The last 10 years of my life, like being a dad was like the number one biggest thing in my life. So I am, sorry, listeners, I've channeled all my daddy energy. My parenting, it gives me a place to put all that. And it's been really rewarding. And yeah, a year later, it's more than I had imagined. And unfortunately, it's not an obscure problem. It is, people are showing up at the meetings a lot more. They're getting packed, and our listener numbers are growing. But yeah, so that's how we ended up here. I don't know if did you ever hear of Miles Horton and Paulo Freire? I approached the podcast as a community building thing.
Cool.
There's this book called We Make the Road by Walking, and it's by Miles Horton was this educator in Appalachia, and Paulo Freire was this educator in Brazil, and just this way of building community to learn and educate. So anyway, that's a lot of stuff going on in this podcast to get us here.
I just have one more question for you. You can edit it out. Or I did want to know, like, in your darkest hour, when things get like the hardest, what's your thinking? Like, where does your brain, how do you get yourself out of that? Or what happens? What's the thinking that you use when you go to the darkest, hardest place?
Yeah, I still struggle with that. I don't want to do a trauma dump on you. I think I mentioned it in a podcast, but I have like complex PTSD, and I know it's not really a official diagnosis, because I do have some emotional trauma from when I was a kid, and sometimes I still experience depersonalization, and I have some rough times, and I just have to ride it out. The pharmaceuticals, I've been on a bunch of them. None of them really, they didn't really touch this. So I found that EMDR has been helping me a little bit during periods of time when I've ran, when I've done meditation and things like that, yoga. I've done better. Yeah. So
just getting yourself to do that stuff. And I think that's what's the allure of Kratom. That's what makes Kratom so hard for me. And I think a lot of people is it feels like a lot of times it can get you to that place that you can do stuff. And I think if you have had complex trauma, especially, and you like drinking, and that's totally, I didn't talk about it a lot, but that's totally what I said the whole time I was doing Kratom that kept me like, it's better than drinking. I still feel that way, but it was so insidious. I don't know if I totally feel that way as much anymore, honestly, because it was just so it definitely doesn't slap you in the face like drinking. It doesn't beat you up like drinking, but boy, does it get you in its little webs more than drinking. And to get out of it was like, I'll go without drinking, and I'll be like, I'll clean up for months, and but I just could do that. It's Kratom. So it's tough.
Yeah.
I'm glad that I appreciate you saying that, because I think there's something to that complex trauma, and the way Kratom really soothes it's a really hard thing to let go of.
Yeah, one of my trauma responses is I freeze and I get this paralysis, and the Kratom seemed to break that sometimes. Though sometimes I'd stay like a freeze mode where I'm not addressing something that I need to address, and I would just be high on, and I wouldn't worry about being frozen. But a lot of times it would kick me into gear. But Kratom is fucking addictive.
It really is. It's incredibly addictive. Like I said, I've messed around with crack. I never got addicted like this. But I just wanted to say, though, have you heard of internal family systems?
I haven't looked at it.
It's I really think it's the breakthrough therapy. To me, it's the thing. I do EMDR and have had an EMDR, the other side of it. And when I learned about internal family system, especially if you've had complex trauma, I was like, oh, this is it. This is the thing. So look into it. It's really cool because it looks like in your internal self and all these different parts of yourself.
Yeah.
So you have like your Kratom using self, and you got your podcast self, and you got this, and just like it's almost like you almost have like group therapy with your internal, with all of the people in you, so that you have a more harmonious balance. And I just thought it was groundbreaking, because I think when you have complex trauma, they say you have all these protectors that kind of come up, and it's hard to get in there. It's hard to get that work done. And this kind of therapy will work with those protectors and meet them where they're at, and like get they're almost like the gatekeepers. They get their permission so you can open up and actually do the real work.
Internal family systems?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, check it out. I think it's beautiful. I think it's a beautiful, amazing, fairly newer-ish therapy that.
Yeah. One last thing, that's another reason we have this podcast, was right after I had my trauma as a child, the way I responded was I became an honor student and an Eagle Scout. So I like, and the podcast is a little bit of that. I had this traumatic experience, so instead of just sitting with it, I had to do something. I had it was like being an Eagle Scouts, like public, and a little bit of a facade. It's a little bit of I loved scouting. There was a lot of good stuff with scouting, and it gave me structure that I didn't have at home. But all right, let's.
Yeah, it's like you're saying, it's a part. Like they would say in internal film. So you have this part that's like this Eagle Scout A student part, and this part jumps up when there's a trauma, and it helps you. And it's okay, I'm gonna make a podcast. And what they say in internal family therapy is like there's all parts are good. All parts are good. Our addict part's good. They're all good. The intention's good. They also all carry a burden, even the ones that we think are like, I think you're noticing, right? The Eagle Scout part has its burden that it carries too, right? There's something to it that it carries. And the addict part also carries something good. Like they say, addict parts are often like, it's like our child that just wants to have fun, that just wants to feel good. And if we dampen that out, we got to nurture that and let this part that wants to play and have fun and feel good and not deal with work and not deal with heavy, hard stuff. How to nourish that so it just doesn't have to go for drugs to feel that way.
I'm going to be looking that up. Thank you.
Yeah, check it out. It's been such an honor. Thank you so much for having me on. And I was just excited to talk to you, honestly. I was like, I get time with Charlie. Because like I said, you've been like just such a support person in my head, and just been such kind of like a warm introduction to the quitting Kratom world, and something that, I feel like I had some familiarity with. So it was, okay, I feel comfortable here. And
I'm glad I can return the flavor. I've had similar parasocial relationships with some recovery podcasters that really got me through some dark places. So I'm glad I can pass it on.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Charlie. Bye-bye.
Bye. Kratom in the headlines. Former users and experts debate whether Kratom, an herbal substance, helps or harms those who take it. This is from Cronkite News. It's both a written article and a news piece in video form. And it was produced and written by two reporters. The first was Nicole Macias Garbe, and the second is Denzen Cortez. And I have a little clip here for you to play.
Aaron, who asked to only use his first name, turned to Kratom last year to help with his issues related to alcohol.
I think in the beginning, it was a good substitute with my stress, my anxiety. But then just like alcohol, it quickly turned into like I needed it to feel normal.
How was it like kind of doing your job while doing Kratom? How did it affect your performance at your work?
Made my job a lot more fun and I was better at my job. But if I didn't have money to buy Kratom, then I would be withdrawing and in a horrible mood.
Those are classic symptoms of withdrawals, and according to the Arizona Naturopathic Physicians Medical Board, Kratom poses a risk for addiction if consumed in higher doses. Banner Health medical toxicologist Dr. Michelle Rua says it's also hard to measure dosing of an unregulated substance.
We really don't know what we're getting, so you always take a risk. Even if it's from a reputable company, that doesn't mean that they are necessarily adhering to the dose that they're putting on the packaging.
And for those struggling, their journey is spelled out in black pen. Aaron wrote this letter to himself describing how he was reliable and energetic, all before Kratom. He is now Kratom free and has been for 4 months. And though the obstacles have been hard, like skateboarding, he is mastering them, one at a time.
In addition to those interviews, and by the way, great job, Aaron. We're rooting for you. Congrats on 4 months. There was a spokesman from the American Kratom Association that provided their point of view, and a former Kratom user that used it for pain relief, but had to discontinue even though they found it helpful after it seemed like it was causing some liver problems for them. And we're just sharing this because we believe it's important to get the word out there that Kratom is, in fact, addictive. It's not addictive for everybody, and it's certainly milder than something like heroin, but it's definitely way more problematic than having a bad Doritos habit where you just can't stop eating the whole bag of Doritos once you open it. And that's often how Kratom's compared to. And it's a serious substance that some people need to go to rehab for, that some people need medicated assisted treatment for. They have broken relationships. People ring up their credit cards and sometimes have to declare bankruptcy. And it causes some bad health issues as well, from seizures to organ dysfunction. And then in rare cases, it can be a cause of death. So we want to be a counter to the Kratom over enthusiasts about it. There's this irrational kind of excitement for it as being a cure-all we think is misplaced. And even though for centuries there was this drug hysteria, reefer madness about the harms of marijuana, there's an inverse going on with the mainstreaming and marketing of Kratom, and with the having it sold on every corner of America with very little warnings, with really mismarketing it. Not a lot of times the packaging doesn't explain that Kratom is an essential ingredient. There's not a universal labeling or testing of it. And it really takes away a customer's informed choice. At this point, it's really ridiculous to say that Kratom isn't addictive. And one of the kind of sophisms about it is Kratom isn't addictive if you don't take too much. It's only addictive if you're into self-abuse. And that's just not the case. It's a biological agent that interacts with your brain chemistry, and it interacts with your opiate receptors, and it creates dependence and tolerance. And with that, to get the same effects, you need to take more. And when you take more, then it poses a risk for addiction and a loss of control, and then eventual consequences. So we hope to be hope for you all out there. It can be hard to quit. There seems to be the risk of relapse on Kratom. That's one of the challenges with it. But with some work and persistence, it's possible to stay quit and to live a better life without it. And that's Kratom in the headlines this week. Welcome to Resource of the Week. I'm going to share a link to a podcast about the internal family systems that Sofia talked about during her interview. But before, I just want to give you an update on my first week enjoying being a year off of Kratom. And actually, it was one of my hardest weeks of the year. It started off, I got really sick for about 72 hours, horrible sore throat, and I stuffed up and coughed. It was like the worst illness I can remember in the last 5 years, maybe 10 years, way worse than the case of COVID I got. And then at the beginning of the week, I had a dentist appointment and I went to it and I thought it was a failed filling, but it looked like my tooth cracked. And the dentist said, the root canal probably won't work on this. We're going to have to pull this. It's probably your best choice. So I did that and it was right on the spot. They did a bunch of shots and numbed me up really good, but it still hurt with a pair of pliers essentially. And that trauma activated a dormant infection on the other side of my mouth from a crown that I had that had a little bit of an infection. And within 24 hours, my mouth blew up to the size of a softball. And it was just so painful. And I went to another specialist because this was like a gum surgery. They're going to have to do this, but they can't work on it while it's swollen. So they gave me an antibiotic and some steroids. And I felt some pain they don't give out opioids at the dentist like they did before. And anyway, one recommendation I do have for dental pain, because I had cravings from between the sickness and the two teeth emergencies. I wanted to use Kratom. I need some relief. It was really bad. And I've always wondered about this. I've heard it recommended. I finally went to the health store and I got some essential clove oil, and that really did the trick on the toothache, the pain. It was like instantaneously. And so I just want to encourage all of you, don't be big pharma shills and go with something like Oragel, which I find not effective. But when you have out there a jar of clove oil. All right. So thank you, Sofia, for this resource. It is an interview with the founder of Internal Family Systems. His name is Richard Schwartz, and it's on that 10% Happier podcast, episode 323, and it's entitled How and Why to Hug Your Inner Dragons. And just to give me an overview, the internal family systems model is both an accurate map of the personality system and a form of psychotherapy developed by Richard Schwartz that is compassionate, inclusive, spiritual, powerful, healing, and directly respectful of your inner life. So I think there's probably some readings you can do about it. You could try to find a therapist in this specialty and see, maybe there's some groups, and there's probably some workbooks out there too to do some personal work. That's the resource of the week. And thanks a lot, Sofia. I'll put a link in the show note. And until next week, keep it Kratom free.